For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica Allen. I'm a physical therapist with OhioHealth. I split my time between the Upper Arlington outpatient clinic, which recently moved right into the center of Upper Arlington, and then the multidisciplinary neuroscience tower over at Riverside. So some of you I think I've met before, and some of you I've never met before. So if I haven't, it's a pleasure to meet you. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. First of all, if you ever have any questions, feel free, let me know. Hey, I got a question, that's fine, okay? First things first, falls, they're a big deal for a lot of reasons. First thing is about 1 in 3 seniors above the age of 65 and nearly 1 in 2 seniors over age of 80 will fall at least once this year. So that's pretty large amount, right? And this is going into considerations with not only the neurological diagnoses, so that could be from stroke to Parkinson's disease to anything along that spectrum, and then the normal aging process. Regardless, it definitely has a big impact, and it's not a normal thing. And I think that's the big thing that we have to realize, that it's, yes, as we get older and things change, but it's not something that we want to be, oh, I'm just falling. So that's, I think, the biggest thing. From there, when we're looking specifically at Parkinson's, 90% of those with Parkinson's will fall at some point during their lives. That's a pretty significant amount, right? With that being said, we want to look at all of the negative implications that can potentially happen with that. And it can go from the obvious ones, if you break a bone or you hit your head or something along those lines, but to the fear and anxiety that goes along with falling, because that can be really limiting in of itself. The other thing is that falls are more associated with admittance into long-term care facilities and hospitals as well. So it's not only a bad thing from just our self-being, but also from the overall healthcare considerations too. So it's just something to think about. Basically, the big thing that we're going to spend doing is identifying hazards within our home and even within our community and things like that. And you brought up a perfect example, fall risk prevention. And let's go through these narrow little walkways with all of these chairs and things like that. That's a perfect example. And so with everything that we talk about, it's going to be more geared towards your home, but also think about it in a community sense too. So how could we maybe make this situation better, or how could we fix this so it's not something that could potentially cause a fall or something like that? And so that's what we'll talk about a little bit too. First thing, we're going to start in the bathroom. And if you follow the one identifying fall hazard, most falls occur in the bathroom and bedroom. Reason being because the nighttime, it's darker, we have to get up and go to the bathroom, those types of things. The first thing we want to look at is what could potentially cause a fall. The first big one is the tub or shower. They become slippery, right? The water, things like that. There's also so many good things that we can grab a hold of. Towel racks, soap dishes, things along those lines that we need to be concerned about. The other thing is toilet seats. Are they too low? That tends to be a problem, or are they in a bad place? That's where a lot of people will describe that it's tucked away in a corner so that you have to make a quick turn and then tuck in and turn around. That can sometimes be something that you have to consider. The other thing that people don't necessarily think about is doors with locks. So if they get locked, what potentially could happen from that perspective? The way that we kind of offset these issues is you can consider using non-skid decals in the tub or shower. Now, my only caveat with that is that you want to make sure it's a good one, because they make some of them that don't really stick that well. And so then it becomes more of a fall hazard than something that's helping you. So if it's moving around, it's not helping you, okay? The other thing, don't hold on to your shower doors, your towel rack, your soap dishes. The other thing is you can use an elevated toilet seat. With that, just make sure that it's sturdy and things like that. And then a sturdy plastic seat in the bathtub is another thing. And when we were talking about using with the door locks, the reason that that's something that you may want to just remove the locks is for some reason it does get locked and you go to pull and it's stuck. You're then trying to step back and move, which we'll get into that a little bit later, but those movements can sometimes be hard to be able to compensate for, especially if you're not expecting it. Here's a couple things that in the bathroom. So we'll start with the grab bar. Everyone's probably seen a grab bar, right? The big thing to think about that is they're starting to make like all of these ones that you can stick onto different places and they're more movable. And my only concern with that is that if they're the stickable ones, will they stay when there's shower going on, when there's humidity, if there's changes in temperature, all of those things. So make sure your grab bars are securely and adequately placed, okay? Shower chairs. There's a couple reasons that I like the shower chairs, of these ones specifically, is that they change heights. It'll work okay for me, and it will also work for someone that's much, much taller than me, okay? So you can always change that height. Now, the one thing that I don't necessarily like about these is that there's not a back. And for some people, you don't need a back, right? If you're okay moving and posturally, you don't necessarily have any imbalance and those types of things, you may not need a back. But for some people, they do. The other thing is there aren't really armrests, right? There's something to push off of, but not really true armrests. And again, some people don't need that, but some people do. So those are the things that you want to consider if you're deciding, hey, I probably need a shower chair. Those are the things you want to look at. And then an elevated toilet seat. I'm sure everyone's seen some shape or form of that. Just make sure, again, that it's securely attached and that it's not going to slip on you. They also make the ones that you set over it, and those work fine too, as long as they're just stable. Move into the bedroom. So we touched on this briefly, but one of the things that you want to make sure is that the lighting is good, right? So we want the bedroom warm and peaceful and things like that for a reason. One thing that people often say is use night lights and things like that. But the first thing that I always hear is, well, I don't want to disturb my partner, which is a good concern to have. The other thing is that, and you all know this, sometimes sleep doesn't come easy, right? And so having that night light on can make it more challenging. So if that's the case, if you can't do a nightlight, just make sure you have like a flashlight or something that you know where it is and you'll be reminded to use it if you get up in the middle of the night. If you're using a walker at night or something like that, maybe you get a little basket or a little pouch that you can just set that flashlight in and set it right in front of you so that as soon as you get up, that walker and that flashlight are right in front of you so you can't forget. Okay, so it's little things like that. The other thing is the bed's too high or too low. So you want to make sure that it's fairly easy to get in and out of. And so with that being said, is sometimes those soft plush mattresses can be challenging too. So you might want to consider using a firm mattress. Making sure that your bedding materials are appropriate. So the nice satiny sheets can sometimes be challenging because you're slipping all over the place and it's hard to actually move in the bed. So using cotton or wool are typically a better idea. Yeah?
Sometimes a cell phone makes for a good flashlight.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yep, absolutely. And the same thing goes, as long as it's in a place that you'll remember to use it, that works fine. But yeah, that tends to be, which it's nice that we have that option now. Lamp, cell phone, whatever, works great. The other thing is with closets. So closets can sometimes be a challenge. One thing to consider is that everything that you need needs to be about waist level, right? Or try the best that you can so that most of the things that you need are that way. And we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about the kitchen. But you want to make sure too that everything's organized in a good manner. So you shouldn't be bending out and around this shoebox and then stepping over this cabinet to get to those types of things, okay? So the things that you aren't going to use, that's where you want higher and lower. And if you need help getting to them, then you don't have to, it's not a daily basis thing. Okay, so think most things are at waist level that you use daily, and then keeping things clutter-free. Okay, so does anyone have any problems with freezing? Does that term sound familiar at all? Yeah, okay. So for those that it doesn't sound familiar, it's a term that's given that we sometimes where we're moving and all of a sudden, and not necessarily for a reason, we stop and we can't move or move further past that. It's also, some people have issues with it when they're starting to move. So with this, Having clutter and having narrow spaces and things where you have to maneuver in narrow spaces tends to be a lot more difficult. So what the first thing we say is we want to make sure that you clear the clutter and make room for walking so that nothing's blocking those walkways. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? Next thing, kitchen. So we kind of touched a little bit on keeping things waist level. That's the same thing in the kitchen. So the things that you aren't going to use day in, day out, that stuff can go up higher or down lower. Otherwise, the things that you need should be right about here, okay? And we briefly talked about that balance control and those balance reactions when we're moving forward and backward, and I'm sure you're working on those a lot in these classes. But that tends to be something that's difficult for those with Parkinson's, which is why you're working on it in part. But it's also something that you should be cautious about when you're in your home and doing things like that. So things where you would open the refrigerator door, where you would take a step back, that's one. The oven, when you're opening the oven and taking a step back. Same if you're opening a big cabinet. All of those things, that's when you want to consider, okay, I need to make sure I got my balance and then take that step, okay? Or if you can't, if you're at the point where you can't maintain your balance there, then maintaining that wide base of support, which I also know that you guys are working on. So that's the big one with the kitchen. Oh, and the other thing, and I think this goes without being said, is the slippery floors, right? Because we're constantly cleaning dishes or putting away dishes from the dishwasher, so the likelihood of a little bit of water getting on the floor is probably pretty good. So you want to be aware of that. The other thing is if you have to wear shoes or things like that, you want to wear the rubber-soled shoes, okay? That way you're not going to slip as bad or be at risk for slipping as much if you do come across something. So next one, floors. Obviously, if you have any tattered or torn carpet, it's probably the best to replace it or have it fixed or something along those lines. I think that one kind of makes sense. And then keeping cords out of walkways or not putting them under rugs. And with rugs, the big one is not to use throw rugs, just for the same reason of tripping and those types of things, but not putting a cord underneath them for sure, okay? And then when we talked about clutter, keeping small objects and clutter away from the stairs. I think that still is something that's important. Now, with stairs, one thing that they suggest is to make sure that you have handrails on both sides. So if you don't have handrails on both sides, then the recommendation is to have the rails about 1 to 2 inches from the wall and that they extend out 30 inches from the top and the bottom of the steps. So it gives you plenty of room with railing, basically to clear the stairs, okay? The other thing is that when you're going up the stairs, the rise on this step, if you have a rise much more than 6 inches, it can sometimes be more difficult to generate that force, okay? Most stairs you will see will be about 6 inches. I've seen a few in the home where they're 8. It just kind of depends. But if you are having stairs built for some reason or something like that, you definitely want them no more than 6. And if you're having a step built into a home, you want it to be a platform step too. So it gives you more space and things like that, okay? So it would be a wider step. Does that kind of make sense? So it would give you room. It would give you room this way and this way. So it's not gonna be the narrow. Here, let me show you a picture. So when you talk about a step, you have this narrow space, right? So with a platform step, it's gonna offer more space this way and this way. Chances are this is more if you're going into a home or into a building. Does that make sense?
It would be on the exterior.
Yes, you're probably never going to run into a platform set of a staircase, unless it's probably not within the home, I would imagine. Now a landing, yes, potentially, but as a whole, not so much. A platform step, if you're building one into some type of threshold or something like that. The other thing is if they're slippery, having non-skid treads placed on all the steps. Have you guys seen those before? So there's some on the steps going down into McConnell, like to the bottom floor, there's some of those non-skid treads. They probably need, I noticed them coming in, they probably need replaced soon, but those are what I mean by that. The other thing is making sure that you have enough light to see each step and the landing. And then the last thing, we're going to talk a little bit, with Parkinson's, we sometimes can see some visual, spatial, or depth perception problems. So one of the things that specifically with stairs that creates is, where do I need to step? Does anyone ever have that problem? Especially with a really plush, like patterned carpet where it's hard to differentiate the edge of the step with the next one. So what we typically recommend is, as you can see on that side, this one actually has like I think probably a rubber placement over the step to differentiate, but you also could use like a solid line of like a duct tape that will stay or something along those lines so that it differentiates the steps. Does that make sense? You just got to make sure that it's not going to come up or anything like that. Now with these guys, you have to be cautious because sometimes they have a lip on them, so you want to watch that you're not going to catch your toe. But this gives you an idea of what differentiating one step from the next will do. Next thing, and I think we talked about a lot of these with furniture, lighting, and personal clothing and footwear. With the furniture, you just want to make sure it's not blocking anything. No furniture walking. So if you're furniture walking, you know that you're reaching for things, and that in and of itself is a little bit of puts you at risk for falls too. The other thing is with your chairs, the most adequate height is anywhere from 18 to 21 inches. Most chairs are about that height. It's just you'll run into where they have the cushions and things like that, which are harder to get out of. The other thing is you want to make sure the handrests are stable, so if you're going to push on them to come forward, that they're not moving on you or at risk for breaking. And then with the lighting, the only other thing is you can also, we talked about it being too dim, but if it's too direct and it creates a glare, again, that could potentially mess with some of the visual spatial awareness and things like that. So where you have difficulty deciding where things are and that kind of stuff, okay? Last thing is looking at yards and entrances. So we briefly started talking about entrances. So the same thing you want to look for is if it's a small threshold. So if you could choose, I would recommend, if you, let's say you're building your house right now, I would recommend a smooth entrance so that there's no threshold, it's just a door you can walk through. It's hard to find that though sometimes, so you have to be careful with the small thresholds, okay? That can sometimes be challenging. And then uneven surfaces. So like if you're in the yard, those types of things can sometimes be challenging. If you have cracked pavement or holes in the yard, I'd fill in the holes and then have the pavement fixed too, okay? And then ice, obviously, be very cautious. Wet leaves on blacktop, sometimes people forget about that. That can be very slippery as well, okay? So in kind of a summary of everything that we talked about with these, big things to consider, you want to maintain wide open walkways so that you know things aren't feeling cluttered, you're not feeling narrowed. That way you can maintain a normal gait pattern and things like that, especially if you're having difficulty with freezing episodes and things like that. The other thing is changes in surfaces. So tile to carpet to wood flooring, that can sometimes be challenging, okay? And then increase caution with those backward steps. So opening the refrigerator, opening a door somewhere, all of that kind of thing. A lot of this stuff you guys may have heard before, or it might be completely new to you. With it, I think my biggest recommendation is to use it as a checklist. So kind of say, do I do all these things? Have I done all these things? And really just check it off, because some of them you'll be like, yeah, duh, I always do this. But some of them, they make you think and you're like, oh, okay. Do I really have everything organized the way that I should? Okay, and I think the biggest thing that I take from this is making sure that you have everything where it needs to be. So a telephone in every room, or access to a telephone in every room, in case, or carry around your cell phone, those types of things, or have an alert button. That way, in case something happens, you're able to get a hold of someone. The other thing is that you have the telephone numbers too. Okay, so you know who to call and what the number is and everything from that perspective, okay? And then the other thing is making sure you're taking your meds on time too. So I don't know if everyone on here is taking medication, but if you are, you know that really affects your mobility too. So sometimes the organization piece, if you use an organizer, can be really helpful, okay? Any questions on that? And take your time. So with your transitional movements, make sure you're taking your time, you're moving slowly, all of that, okay? Especially in the bathroom, and in the bathtub, and those types of things where it's slippery and everything. Any questions? There's shoestrings that you can purchase that they're elastic, so you don't have to tie them every time. So you can take the shoe on and off without actually tying it. Yep.
Where do you get them?
I think anywhere. I imagine you can get them anywhere. If not, they're definitely online. All right, thank you guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes.